Thank you so much for joining us for this event celebrating Gabrielle Zevin's book Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And we're here with Gabrielle and Robin Sloan. Let's give it up for them. This is very exciting. There are very few books that I've had the pleasure of partaking in that also have a video game attached to them. So I'll share that on our website if you haven't seen it already. It's very cool. But suffice it to say, we're really delighted to have Gabrielle and Robin here. So I'll be very brief in my business, and then we'll get to the fun part as soon as possible. Please do check out our full event calendar on our website at greenapplebooks.com/event. We have a little biased, but we have a pretty great season ahead of us, including this evening's event. So if you're into stuff like this, you might be into some other stuff that we have to offer. That's at greenapplebooks.com. And all of our events are free unless stated otherwise. So if you are able, please do buy books. Please do buy books from us if you can. Thank you for supporting independent bookstores in San Francisco. When you buy stuff from here, you help us stay here. And you also get to support pretty cool authors, and then you get to have a book, and that might be the best part. So if you are able, please do buy books from us. Thank you for keeping your mask on between sips of beverage. I do encourage you to grab some stuff that we have over here on the table. It is complimentary. We want you to be able to imbibe. We just ask that you keep your mask on between sips because we're trying to move forward as safely as we can. So thank you for being cool about it. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two authors that we have joining us. I'll do one right after the other before I let them take the stage. First, I'm excited to introduce Robin Sloan. Robin's first novel, Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore, was a New York Times bestseller and translated into more than 20 languages. His most recent novel, Sourdough, was published in 2017, and we have an extended edition, is that correct, of Sourdough, the director's cut, coming out in September of this year. So we have that to look forward to. And with his partner, Robin produces California extra virgin olive oil under the label Fat Gold. Please do welcome Robin Sloan. Okay, let's talk about getting some olive oil in the store. I think that'd be really cool. Last but most certainly not least, Gabrielle Zevin is the New York Times and internationally best-selling author of several critically acclaimed novels, including The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, which won the Southern California Independent Booksellers Award and the Japan Booksellers Award, among other honors, and Young Jane Young, which won the Southern Book Prize. Her novels have been translated into 39 languages. She has also written books for young readers, including the award-winning Elsewhere. She is joining us from Los Angeles. Her book, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, is the reason we're here tonight. So please join me in welcoming Gabrielle Zevin. Yeah, whichever.
You want to be, which side do you? I'll go on this side.
Okay, I felt more.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that introduction. We're gonna hear Gabrielle read in just a moment, but for the folks here in the store and watching online and watching the recording later, I want to offer some context that I think is very important. I'm sure that everyone who buys books is familiar with blurbs, but you might not be like blurb connoisseurs. When you have been asked for blurbs and written blurbs and received blurbs yourself, you kind of get to know the form a little bit. And so I have to report to you that I've actually never, ever seen blurbs of the kind on the back of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Usually they're like, and I'm sure you know this, Gabrielle, you've even written blurbs like this yourself. Usually they're sort of modulated, it's kind of like, well, here's what's good about it and here's what makes it different. And I'm trying to be helpful and kind of position it in the cosmos of books. That is not what these writers did for this novel. Be sure to flip it over when you get a copy and you'll see that the blurbs are basically, this is the best novel. I agree, best one. Yep, there are not better novels than this. And then just like, yep. So it's pretty astonishing. And I think it sets a pretty high bar, and having read the book myself, I think they're well deserved. So with that, would you read us a little bit of the book?
Yes. Well, On a late December afternoon in the waning 20th century, Sam exited a subway car and found the artery to the escalator clogged by an inert mass of people who were gaping at a station advertisement. Sam was late. He had a meeting with his academic advisor that he had been postponing for over a month, but that everyone agreed absolutely needed to happen before winter break. Sam didn't care for crowds, being in them, or whatever foolishness they tended to enjoy en masse. But this crowd would not be avoided. He would have to force his way through it if he were to be delivered to the above ground world. Sam wore an elephantine navy wool peacoat that he had inherited from his roommate Marks, who had bought it freshman year from the Army Navy surplus store in town. Marks had left it moldering in its plastic shopping bag just short of an entire semester before Sam asked if he might borrow it. That winter had been unrelenting, and it was an April nor'easter. April, what madness these Massachusetts winters, that finally wore Sam's pride down enough to ask Marks for the forgotten coat. Sam pretended that he liked the style of it, and Mark said that Sam might as well take it, which is what Sam knew he would say. I have never given a reading in a mask before. And I'm noticing that it's harder to breathe. That in fact, so I'm very somebody who believes in masking, but just for this being a more pleasurable experience, I think I'll take it off while I read at least.
How fun.
Okay.
How transgressive.
Oh, wow. Now it's like there's so much air in here. And I really believe in mask wearing. I just want to say that too. Like most things purchased from the Army Navy surplus store, the coat emanated mold, dust, and the perspiration of dead boys. And Sam tried not to speculate why the garment had been surplused. But the coat was far warmer than the windbreaker he had brought from California his freshman year. He also believed that the large coat worked to conceal his size. The coat, its ridiculous scale, only made him look smaller and more childlike. That is to say, Sam Mazur at age 21 did not have a build for pushing and shoving, and so as much as possible, he weaved through the crowd, feeling somewhat like the doomed amphibian from the video game Preorder. He found himself uttering a series of excuse me's that he did not mean. A truly magnificent thing about the way the brain was coded, Sam thought, was that it could say excuse me while meaning screw you. Unless they were unreliable or clearly established as lunatics or scoundrels, characters in novels, movies, and games were meant to be taken at face value, the totality of what they did or what they said. But people, the ordinary, the decent, and basically honest, couldn't get through the day without that one indispensable bit of programming that allowed you to say one thing and mean, feel, even do another. Thank you. Thank you.
So it's exciting. The book is out today, isn't it? This is the day. Am I right?
Yesterday was the day.
Yesterday was the day, right?
Yes.
So most folks have not had a chance to read it unless they were privy to some sort of secret access program like me. So we'll do our best to kind of contextualize it a little bit and make sure that people don't get confused. So it's a story about a working relationship, and it is a romance of a sort, but it's a collaboration fundamentally. And it's really the engine at the heart of this story. And it's fabulous to read about as it develops over almost 20 years over the course of this whole narrative. Where did that central partnership come from? Like, how did you decide this is it? This is going to be the heart of my next novel, this kind of thing?
You know, I think I was thinking about marriages. I was thinking about just the ways that we spend our lives these days and how they're not the same, and how really a great love story can actually be a great friendship story, even though it sometimes seems as if, you know, love stories still traditionally end in one way, you know. And so I think I wanted to explore that, you know. So for these two characters, you know, Sam, and, you know, probably Sadie is the most important person in his life, but, you know, he is a person who is not a physical person. And, you know, I don't want to just like say that's because of a childhood trauma, but he's a person who just is not physical. And he and Sadie have a romance of the mind, if not the body. And, you know, maybe Sadie also feels that Sam is the most important person in her life, you know. And so I think what it is this sort of, you know, irresolvable puzzle, really. You know, what if the most important person in your life wasn't any of the usual suspects? Like, what if it wasn't your, you know, your spouse or your child? You know, What if it really was your friend,
I mean, it's quite radical in that way, somewhat against the backdrop of kind of our culture, but certainly against the backdrop of stories and
Yeah.
storytelling and what we read in novels and see in, prestige cable dramas and everything. I feel like there's some corrective force here. And I don't know if you were kind of trying to plant a flag and say, hey, what about these? Or if it just was a little more natural than that.
No, I think it was more natural than that.
Yeah.
I think at this point, I'm 17 years into a novel writing career, and I've given up in thinking I can convince anyone of anything in books,
Yeah.
And so I just, I can reflect the world as I see it.
Mhm.
And I think that's the job more than it is to convince anybody.
Yeah.
I think I used to really believe in the novel as a vehicle for social change. And I'm just not sure that I'm not sure that I do anymore. So I'm not sure I'm trying to plant any flags. But I do think what a novel can do really well as opposed to a tweet, is it's a slow form, it's a long form, and it can show some like perspective and you can show how time has changed, and so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to show that, again, a story with new kinds of people. And, it's funny, like I was reading a review of the book and the person was talking about the fact that games are kind of like friendship in a way, in that friendship is not productive, but that implies that games are also not productive, I suppose, but I know what they mean. I think some people think that, marriage is real love because it ends in something. It ends in children, or it ends in a ceremony, or it ends in something, but friendship doesn't have any of those things in it, so.
I mean, one of the things that friendship has, of course, a lot of is conversation, or you might even say that it's made out of conversation or forged out of conversations. And truly one of the strengths of this novel is the conversation, the dialogue. I mean, in a pure craft sense, just the people talking to each other. I mean, especially Sam and Sadie, but it happens, all sorts of combinations across the board as the characters interact and sort of get shuffled around in different configurations. I felt like I could detect in the dialogue and its quality, your affinity and your experience in writing for the stage, for screenwriting. It also made me hyper aware of my own shortcomings as a writer. I was like, okay, that's good dialogue. Has that always been a core strength of yours as a writer, something that you could identify? Is it something you consciously have, cross-trained yourself to get better at? What's the origin? What's the root of that quality?
I don't have a great answer to that question. I know it hasn't ever been a core weakness because I can identify those. And I think, and I had read a thing with you before I came here tonight, where you were talking about how novelists get better, which I think they do. I think for a lot of people think that, your first novel, and you're done. I mean, that's as good as that person is going to be. So you don't really have to pay attention to anything after. But for me, like I've learned some things over time. I think dialogue, the first thing to know about it is it isn't naturalism.
Right.
It doesn't actually sound like people sound.
Right.
People don't actually move things forward through their dialogue.
Right.
So I think that it's not as simple as the sort of like craft exercise of, well, just listen, but it is also just listen. I think it is both those things.
I did. Did you hear you say that as clarifying, because I detected both a naturalism. I mean, it's the way that people speak on the page is not stagey, but it has some of that hyper sharpness. I thought of almost like a Tom Stoppard or something.
Well, that's a very good compliment, but I think that, it has the illusion of naturalism, is what you want. You don't want it to be like, these don't sound like people. But when I read dialogue that I don't think is great, sometimes this isn't always true. Don't you feel like as you get older as a writer, like there are less like rules about all these things?
Yes, absolutely.
Like, I mean, I've done a lot of events with debut novelists over the years, as happens, and they always have a lot of advice about exactly how to do it. They're like first year lawyers in that way, but I don't feel like I had any advice.
Well, I think that's the beauty of the novel. And maybe, you can tell me if you think it's true of screenwriting as well, of the stage, because I don't have experience with those things, but I think the great possibility of the novel is that anything works if it works.
Yeah.
All you have to do is make it work. All you have to do is create somehow that kind of propulsive energy from page to page, and whatever recipe gets you there. I mean, if it works, it works. It's self-justifying.
Well, I mean, I remember some time ago reading the piece with you. I think it was on Tor, like maybe tor.com, where you were talking about long novels, which was pretty much, I could have written the exact same piece. But when I first started writing, I was kind of in a perpetual panic like when I was writing novels, you know, and I think I was really impatient. Like the only thing I saw was how do I get through this thing as quickly as possible and be there in a way as little as possible for that process.
Sure.
But I think over the years, I've been able to engage more with it and just, you know, you write until it's done and it's never done, you know, it's never done really.
I mean, what you say about that fear resonates. I don't know if you were sort of roughly the same age, but I don't know if you have the experience that I did of, in a way, learning to write online. I mean, is that sort of your background, or did you skip straight to?
I'm like a tick older than you.
Okay.
I think I'm like 2 years older than you, which is weird
Just
because
enough.
in like tech years, that makes like all the difference
Yeah,
sometimes.
maybe so.
You know?
Right, we're in different sedimentary layers.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that means there was never internet in my house when I was a kid, when I was still living at home.
Right.
But with the first year I went to college, so this is what these 2 years mean. The first year I went to college, there was internet.
Right, and that was huge.
And the big blue cord. The big,
yeah,
you know
right.
what
The
I mean?
Ethernet cable and the world blooms. Yeah. But it was for me. I that resonates, and also with your sense of novels getting better over time. One of the things that I had to learn wasn't a craft thing at all. It was it was like chill out, man, slow down.
Right.
Because if it's good, people would like to read more of it. They're not the people the way, and we know this as readers, we're not impatient
like,
to
when
finish.
you wrote that piece, I mean, it was one of the things is like, oh, my taste has moved more toward long novels, you know, just over the years, what I want to read, you know, but also I noticed that people are willing to be immersed in something longer. And maybe that's because some of these people play 70-hour video games. Maybe it's because some of them are willing to binge 13 episodes of a television show, you know, but I think in a way, I'm not trying to compete with those forms, but what's great is that the effect of that is that people's attention spans are longer.
Could be,
you know,
that could be, although you talk about competing with other art forms or other media, I feel like this book is a great hack because you essentially invent video games, dramatize them, and put them on the page. And so not in addition to authoring, you know, a novel, you've essentially created like 5 or 6 or 7 video games, which I think is one of the underrated pleasures of writing novels, that in certain situations you get to essentially execute works of art much more quickly and cheaply than you would get than you would have to in the real world.
I don't need a team of programmers and like developers. I don't need to raise money to do this. And I can say like, this really worked out, or this really didn't.
Right.
Actually, it's funny. The thing that was the kind of the most fun thing for me was depicting the failures, you know, like depicting at one point Sadie in the novel, you know, they just really believe that this game is going to work. You know what I mean? And that's the thing you don't know, like how much, like once you think you've had a success, you think I will just keep succeeding, you know, but in fact, careers don't go like up and up and up.
I could see a reflection of your own experience as because again, this is not your first novel. I felt like I saw a reflection of your own experience.
You said that like it's not my first rodeo.
Yeah, and not definitely not your first rodeo.
In
sort of imprinted on the experience at this game studio. It's not just one creator, it's this whole growing team over the course of 20 years in the novel. But I felt like there was some wisdom, some maybe hard-earned
I feel like
wisdom
I've learned a couple of things about just, and you know, the weird thing is when you first fail, it seems incredibly humiliating. So the first year I had 2 novels out. One of them did really well, one of them did really badly. One was for young adults, and one was for adults, and the adult one just basically failed. And the thing and the failure was mortifying, you know, like it felt like you're covered in like soot basically, and you don't even, but anyway, which you didn't have that particular experience because your novel was very successful, the first one. But then, you know, over time you realize that you kind of like failure can be a very creative period. Because what it does is it shuts down everything else, you know. So my last book did less well than the book before it, basically, because the book before it did really, really, really well. You know, and so,
I mean, it's almost tautological. Like, how could the reversion to the mean? It would be incredible if it.
Right. I mean, I think it only works, like things only do equally well if you kind of get into writing in a brand, which neither of us are really like the brand writers, you know, where you're like, you're going to deliver that. I mean, I'm not even insulting any of these people when I say it, but that like James Patterson experience, you know, like, you know what that is. That's not actually a great example.
No, I mean, James Patterson, and I think there are at least
he's got like many brands.
I was going to say that in sort of a workshop, in a sense, I often wonder actually if there's not a certain amount of fun in that approach that more closely approximates a movie production or a video game studio versus this. I mean, are we fools for being so devoted to this, to actually doing it ourselves?
I mean, I can't be any other way. I like to follow You know, sometimes you want to write about bread, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes, like, because to me, that's part of the adventure,
Right.
like the research and the subject that you're going to follow for some period of time.
But you write, I mean, of course I agree. At the same time, I can't help but notice that you write very movingly in this book about not just this video game production studio, but that's part of it. But there's a whole passage where one of the characters talks about their love and appreciation for what it feels like to be in a theatrical production, you know, and the special kind of bonding. And it's a character who is kind of nominally an actor, but doesn't even, that's not what makes it fun and rewarding for them. So you know these things, you feel these things, and yet, Gabrielle, you sit at your desk and write novels, you know, and we just know this, at the heart of the work can only be done alone. Is there any contradiction there for you, or you know, as you say, is there no choice?
I mean, you're alone for a long time when you write a book, and then you're with a lot of people. And so I think there are a lot of people that worked on this book, other than the person whose name is on the cover, which is me, you know. So I think, to me, I do think even novel writing, which is one of the most solitary of all artistic pursuits, you know, I think has many collaborators in it. You know, so like the character of Marx, for instance, he's a producer. I think that he, you know, really was meant to represent all the people in a process. Because at some point somebody has to say, this is good, go read it. You know, at some point somebody's got to put a jacket on it. Like I relish the parts that are the collaborative parts of this job, you know.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it does make you realize, I don't know if you've ever done any self-publishing, but my writing career essentially begins with some really, really small scale self-publishing. And it makes me realize that publishing made me realize to have that experience, and then the experience that you're describing, this, you know, and this experience of a bookstore, that publishing is not just mechanical. I mean, it's not just printing the books, it is creating a context in the world for this thing to exist and maybe succeed. And yeah, I mean, there are this novel has conversations about that, which I think is cool, because it's part of the work too, part of the creative work.
Right. I think people don't always understand how much they're influenced by what the copy is on the book, what the package looks like, you know.
The killer blurbs.
You know, the killer blurbs, like how all of that becomes part of that experience of that book. I didn't understand it. I think,
no, me neither.
You know, and I think when I first started in publishing, I had gone to bookstores my whole life without thinking that much about what any of the things in a bookstore even mean or represent. Like, why are some books on the table? Why do some books sit in the wall? Why are books here at all? Look at how few books there are actually in a relatively small bookstore. You know, whose taste does this represent, and how did they get there? And so I think, like, that's very true. I mean, the idea that so much of it is providing this context, you know.
Yeah. And it's not, it turns out just a book between two covers is insufficient. It's a good start, but you do need more. Late in the novel, I don't know why this struck me so much. Maybe it again has to do with that, those age slices and being, you know, broadly in a particular generation, sometimes called the Oregon Trail generation, which connects to the storyline of this book. Late in the novel, and this is not a spoiler, a character remarks, "We were lucky to be born when we were." And so these characters are roughly the same age as you and as me.
Well, they're basically 2 years older than me.
Yeah.
Who is 2 years older than you.
But so my question is that statement something that Gabrielle Zevin believes about herself too, or about her cohort?
I do. You know, I think there are ways in which if I had been born at a different time, I would have been very intimidated by just being able to see everything everyone is doing all of the time, you know, and knowing how kind of small and unoriginal you are. You know, I don't think I ever would have gotten here in a way. Like, I think, you know, the internet is wonderful for so many things.
Yeah.
I think we rely on it for so many things, but what it is not great for is for a young genius to really feel that. You know, there's too much, because so much of art, and it's another part of the book, so much of art is getting between the period of time when your skills do not meet up to your taste.
Yeah.
And I felt like I only recently got to a place where that happened at all. And that's like 10 books in, you know, and I'm lucky a lot. And it's not to say I don't like those other books. I like them. It's just that and so I'm only talking about my personal taste,
Mhm.
not like necessarily reader's taste or anything like that. I'm not
Right.
trying to imply that, like,
Right.
but you know what I'm saying.
I do. Imagining, therefore, so I mean, I've always felt that way as well, especially with respect to the internet and digital things, to have essentially been born at the moment when it wasn't dropped on you and your kind of fully
No,
built life like a ton of bricks, but also wasn't already there waiting for you like the air and the sky and the sea, but was something that kind of grew up with you, and you could kind of maybe take in doses, in
Right.
smaller doses over time. I mean, I've
didn't have to
always
have
felt
it
lucky.
all the time, for a long time.
Yeah.
For a long time, it was there in a pleasant way,
Yeah. As an optional distraction, not a mandatory obsession. But here's the challenge then. If you imagine you, and really someone as you are, who's growing up the way that you grew up with many or all of the same influences, but doing so right now. I mean, let's say she's 22 today. Does she become a writer? Does she still want to write fiction, or is she off on some other track?
I mean, who knows, really? There are so many ways you can specialize now, and you can follow rabbit holes of knowledge and much more quickly and easily. I think like the thing about being born, I was born in 77. The thing about being born in 1977 is I had to deal with a lot of pop culture that didn't interest me. You couldn't just watch exactly what you liked all of the time. And some of that is useful, so I don't know what I become necessarily, but I feel like when you see sometimes a young novelist today, they seem far more self-possessed and savvy. It doesn't always make the books better, by the way.
Right, of course.
But they see, and I think that can, what I was writing about was how that was kind of intimidating too, just like knowing so much doesn't necessarily help you write a better book either.
Yeah.
It can just be a hindrance,
Absolutely. I have one last proper question, and then we are going to close with a lightning round.
Wow.
Just to it's fun. I always do it here at Green Apple Books. It's my favorite thing to do here. There is a lot of, and I want to be very careful to not verge into spoilery territory here at all, but so I'll speak in maybe slightly maddening abstraction. There's so much generosity in this book, and to me, characters doing generous things, and also like things working out in a way that, again, sort of like the radical approach of dramatizing this collaboration, the fun of reading about like someone being very kind and then like good things happening felt almost transgressive. You're like, wait a second, these people aren't all like self-destroying assholes who are slowly, their lives are slowly unraveling. I mean, there's a bit of that too sometimes, but I was just wondering, like, I'm sort of frustrated because I don't have a well-formed question here, but to me, it was one of the great signatures of the book. It's like maybe it founds a new genre of like generosity punk or something. But like, how much of that is part of your theory of stories and what belongs in them? And I don't know, your theory of the world itself.
I mean, I think that it is difficult to be a person on the planet right now. I think that when I look around, I think sometimes the hardest thing to be if you're a thinking person is a thinking person and an optimist. And sometimes I allow myself to be more of an optimist in my books than I probably am in real life, But actually there's this poem I think about pretty often. It's by Donald Hall. Do you know this poet?
I've heard the name, but I don't know.
Well, this poem is really short, so I can just say it. It's called A Poem Beginning with a Line of Wittgenstein. And it goes, the world is everything that is the case. Now stop your blubbering and wash your face, And so I think about this line fairly often, just insofar as I think that the book is truly about people that are able to make perfect worlds and then unfortunately live in the real one,
Right.
And so I think the thing to deal, but the fact is you and I and everyone else, we're stuck in this world, so I hope what people take away from the book is that though we are stuck in this world, it is still worth loving people and making things in an imperfect and uncertain universe.
It would be appropriate to just end our conversation on a sentiment so wholesome and wise, but we will not. Instead, you will be subjected now to the lightning round.
I have a brain in advance that rejects the lightning round. I will engage with the lightning. I just don't seem to bring lightning.
It's very, very simple, and the rules are simple. You'll just be presented with very simple
Right.
dichotomies, some of them senseless. And the only rule is that you must choose one, and you can't ask for clarification, and there will be no dithering.
Or I could just go pass.
These will be considered demerits and recorded on the ledger of Green Apple Books. The lightning round begins, and it's very short. It's very short. The lightning round begins. Harvard or MIT?
Harvard.
First person video game or third person video game?
Third person video game.
Novel written in the first person or novel written in the third person?
Novel written in the third person.
Emily Dickinson or Shigeru Miyamoto?
I'm taking a long pause on that one. It doesn't seem like.
There's no clarifications, and you must choose.
I'm going Emily Dickinson.
Peaches or Persimmons?
Peaches.
Comedy or tragedy?
Comedy.
And these last two are sort of a bracket, so the winners will face
Okay.
off. San Francisco or Los Angeles?
Oh boy, Los Angeles.
Nintendo or PlayStation?
Nintendo.
Okay, so here we have it. Los Angeles or Nintendo?
Oh boy. I think I'm going Nintendo.
Her loyalty is made clear. Let's hear it for Gabrielle Zevin.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to Green Apple, thanks to everyone here, and thanks for everyone watching online.
That's it. Well, thank you. That was lovely.
That was so fun.
Somehow.
I don't know.
For the generosity fund, but I'm very excited about it. Can you give one more hand to Gabrielle and Robin? It's manual.
Oh, it's manual.
Yeah.
I'm just like pressing this button.
Yeah.
and
You're
it's
doing
gonna
great.
do something.
Sending Morse code
Yeah.
beeps out into the ether.
I'm very grateful to you both, and I'm very grateful to you all for joining us. Please do make yourselves comfortable, and Gabrielle is going to sign books. Yes, at the back desk,
Okay.
right here. And thank you so much once again. We will see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.